The topic is rethinking educational leadership in the new age. And what is this new age? Some of us, like myself, are not born in this age, many of us. And we have, I think I was born when I'm, studying leadership. I talk about being born in the industrial age. And in the industrial age, things were radically different. Now, we have come across a totally different era. And we are in the knowledge age. We're in the knowledge era. But the problem is that the practices and the principles that we are still exercising are biased, prejudiced, colored, polluted by the birth that we had, which was in the industrial age. So, what has been the change in the world? Demographics have changed. We are not a world of baby boomers any longer. We are not a world of the yuppies any longer. We are in the world of millennials. People born in this century, in the 21st century. And the millennials are tough. They are not the students, not the teachers, not the staff, not the employees that we are used to. The telling mode, कि बता दिया तो हो जाएगा, right? The instructing mode, which we inherited from our parents. These are millennials who are born with a click in their hand, with the smartphones in their hand. And this is a smart world. You have a smart car, and you have a smartphone, and you have a smart gadget, and you have a smart TV. So, I was going in a taxi and said, meri gaadi bolti hai. I have a car which speaks. So this taxi guy was telling me. So it's a GPS system which speaks to you. So all this is absolutely something that we were not born with. And many of us were not born with. I'm sure there are much younger people who are born in this era. But at least many of us who are not from this era have been struggling to come into terms with this era. Vis-a-vis our children, vis-a-vis our employees, vis-a-vis our professions. So you have the millennials and you have the technological change where social media, where technology has completely revolutionized learning, development, professional development, education, everything. So you have research which used to be carried out in libraries. Now research is Googleable. So the Yahoos and the Googleable aspect. And I was just, talking to somebody the other day and I said, okay, the iPad sale, because I'm from the corporate sector, so I was talking to them, what is the iPad sale like? And they were telling me the iPad sales. And I said, who's your biggest buyer? And you know what the answer I got? 2-year-old. 2-year-olds are the biggest buyers of iPads. वो अपने cartoons उसमें से निकाल लेते हैं. They know the nursery rhymes. They know which button to push, how to Skype. They know everything. So this is the age that we are born with, and it is a challenging and exciting age. And today, if we are here sitting in and talking about rethinking educational leadership, absolutely. Absolutely. And the concept of leadership, which was basically hierarchical in the industrial age, where you had the top guy, the chairman, and then the CEO, and then, in the schools you had the chairman, and then you had the principals, and then you had the superintendents, and then the teachers, and so on and so forth. That is not going to work any longer, because those are the hierarchies which the millennials do not accept. And what do we say? We say, this is a new generation, and they are not willing to learn, and they don't have concentration levels, and they just want quick bucks and quick access to everything. But it's not that. It's how we are going to engage them, inspire them, and before doing that, we have to have paradigm shifts in ourselves. That when we come over here to educate, we don't come to instruct and teach, we come to transform. And transformation can only come if all of us are leaders. So the topic is that how can all the teaching institutions, no matter which level you are, the students, the parents, the superintendents, the principals, can combine and create a creative thinking process which brings out the best in people, which makes them lead themselves and which makes them lead others. That's the topic for today, and that's what we are going to explore further. So what I'd like to do is to request each panelist that I have with me, the august panel that I have, I'll put this question to each one of them, and I'd request each one of them to speak for a couple of minutes on it and express their views. The first question is, what new roles do educational leaders need to play in their own and others' professional development to be able to cope with this new era? So what new roles do you envisage that you need to play, regardless of whichever position you are in education, to be able to cope with the changes that are coming with this new era? So I would like to request Mr. Lee to first comment on it, and then we can go turn by turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me, please? Can I just sort of see a hand at the back, just in case? Thank you. I want to start, really, by going back to what we used to do, which was really focus on learning. I really do believe that actually school leadership is their first priority after keeping the students safe. There we are. After keeping the students safe, the first priority is learning. And yet, too many things get in the way. And I would say there are three key things that get in the way at the moment. The first is teaching. I would actually say, if you go into a classroom now, you see lots more teaching than you do learning. The second thing is performance. There is a significant emphasis on performance, asking students to prove their ability rather than improve their competence. And the third thing I would say that gets in the way of your learning or the students' learning is work. I would argue that we give our students a lot of busy work, and in fact our parents often demand that you as teachers, as educators, give their children a lot of work, activities to do at home and so on, activity sheets, the bane of many teachers' lives. But actually, if you were to look at what's going on with that activity sheet, how much learning is actually going on. So I'm going to leave that with you for the moment, and I'm going to invite my colleagues. But I would say be very careful about the fact that as leaders, the focus is very much on learning and not distraction. And I've given you three things that I think get in the way for the moment, and we can come back to what we might do to overcome them.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to hold this in my lap so that I make sure that everybody can hear me. What you've said has been just spot on. In my current role, we're involved with school evaluations, and I sort of have been in dialogue with 185 principals and school leaders from 185 schools just this academic year. And often through discussion, through discourse, what we find out is that there's too much focus on other things instead of looking at learning, what is actually required. Something that was touched on in the morning session as well is that as educators, our role is in character building. So a lot of us push towards academic learning, and we forget that there are other aspects of learning as well that need to be built and developed in our students. And that is what it means to prepare them for the 21st century skills. There are certain competences and skills that each of our students need to develop, not just academic. You can ingest and reproduce information without having any real meaning and not being able to use it in real life if we do not give them the skills and the understanding of how it connects to the real world and to the reality.
Are we all holding them in our laps? Thank you, Antalib, and thank you everyone for being here. I would like to start out by saying that an education leader is not particularly different from any other leader. One problem that I find with both health and education is that we always tend to treat them as separate. And we have certain assumptions that have perhaps been passed on to us from the way early days of missionary schools, that education should not be profitable, education should not be innovative, experimental. There is a certain boundary and there's a cookie cutter model that must be replicated. Today, the way we teach our students is very much the way you get a sandwich at a Subway store. You know, now everyone's going to get tomatoes, onions or not, and this sauce or that sauce. So while we may all be in the digital information age, unfortunately our education model is very much in the industrial age. In the next 10 years, this is going to change. Someone or some group of people is going to crack this code of how are we going to bring digital learning back to the essence of learning where Plato and Socrates talked about it, where there is creativity, there's an individualized path. Technology, digital platforms, and augmented reality are going to make that possible. Your iPhone 6 and 7s will look as old as a stone and a chisel in the next 10 years. So that's how rapidly technology is interacting. Now, in that context, when you talk about professional development or educational leadership, you really cannot limit yourself as, well, we are within the education domain, so we have a different set of assumptions as opposed to someone else who's operating in some other sector. To me, leadership and really sort of breaking and pushing ourselves beyond our frontier of competence involves three things. And that, I suppose, applies to professional development or starting your own school or being an educational leader, quote unquote. The first thing is you need to have a diagnostic approach. You need to have empathy. You need to be able to understand all perspectives around an issue. So you need to, let's say, girls' education. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would say that girls should not be in school. Yet we continue to hold conferences where like-minded people talk to other like-minded people and publicize in like-minded newspapers about how great we are in talking about the issue of girls' education. The people who are not going to send their girls to school will continue not to do so. Leadership is trying to understand what their perspective is and how in their world it makes complete sense to do that. So first of all, educational leaders must have a diagnostic approach to understand if a 2-year-old is growing up with an iPad, that if he looks at a newspaper, he scrolls the newspaper because that's his reality. We really have to have that empathy to understand what perspective this new generation is growing up with and what perspectives do other people trying to solve this problem have. Secondly, we need to have an experimental approach. It's okay to fail. It's okay to go back to the drawing board. And one of my favorite sayings is, it's not how high you go, it's how well you bounce. You have to be willing to fail 12 times, but come back to the drawing board the 13th time and get it right. The educational leaders who will figure out what this formula for digital learning, which will break the mold for how education will be delivered for the next 100 years, will have an experimental approach. They won't be the ones who got the $10 million grant from this donor or that donor and threw laptops in everyone's laps. And I'm not referring to anyone local. I'm talking about MIT, which had the one laptop per child program, and it actually lowered student learning. So we have to really have an experimental approach and be ready to fail. And then finally, it's very important to understand the relationship of dependency. A leader is very frequently has a messiah complex, and we as a nation suffer from that. There will be one person who will come and save us. Dependency is addictive. But to me, leadership is making yourself dispensable to the cause, that you could replace the leader with anybody else, and the work would go on just the same. Thank you.
It's good being the last person. I can confirm what's gone ahead of me, but just even on the last point, we came to Notre Dame in Karachi 25 years ago, and it was to do ourselves out of a job as Australians, and after 20 years we did do that. So I think there's something there of the movement of replacing leaders who interpret for their own selves and for their own skills. But I think leadership comes from a middle. It doesn't come from an out here. And a leadership in any educational institution or any institution needs to work from the middle with the community around them. And I think when we're talking about when we're talking about schools particularly, it's not just the administration, it's certainly not the financiers, but it is all of those together, the leaders, the administration, the teachers, the support staff, the students and the parents, who, like, even coming up on the plane last night from Karachi, I was sitting next to an army officer, and he actually has a couple of kids at a Beacon House school, but I won't tell you which one. But he said, look, I struggle to find what education is on about. My kids are doing everything, but he said, I don't know if they're learning what I think they need. And he was going back to literacy and numeracy and knowing these things, which is what was at the heart of it, and I guess what he did at school. So to me, educational leaders are also the educators of the parents. So that they have to be intimately involved in whatever we're doing of moving into the future. When I go into supermarkets, when I'm home in Australia, I find, yes, the 12-month, the 18-month-year-old sitting up in the front of the, supermarket trolley, yes, with the iPad, with the tablet, and they're quite entertained. The other thing I want to say about leadership is I think we still have the conveyor belt mentality, that whether it's staff or whether it's students, when we're coming into our institutions, there are certain quality assurance humps that we've got to get over. And everyone seems to have their quality tested in the same way, with the same criteria. And that to me is something that's pulling back our education. It's pulling back us as professionals. I think it is a model that has helped us so far to raise our professionalism, but it can't sustain us. I think it's done its work. We have to look at how are we really going to judge quality. And I guess one of the flip sides of that is I think we affirm kids too much. Oh, it's very good, and sometimes it might be only barely mediocre. And I think that's picking up on Miriam's point that we're not teaching children to fail and to deal with failure and to continue to learn from that. So I think there's some almost disjointed thoughts about what we're trying to cope with in leadership and education as we transform. And, transform is not tweaking a few changes every now and then. Transforming is taking the box and dice and changing it into something else completely. And that is a process that takes a long time and a lot of patience.
So thank you very much for the first round, and I just like some very inspiring thoughts over here. Lee's talking about improving versus proving. That stuck to the mind. I think it's a very important factor. That when you're a leader, you're not trying to prove a point. You're trying to create other leaders. And that's what Mariam also touched upon. The dispensability of a leader. Before you become a leader, it's all about you. After you become a leader, it's all about others. And if, as teachers, as principals, as administration, we can make that paradigm shift of going beyond yourself, that's when you start transforming. Because as long as you're focused on yourself and how good you are as a principal or a teacher or a leader, there'll always be limitations. Because your vision will be limited only to yourself. Vision is seeing the unseen. Vision is transforming the untransformable. Vision is the converting the ordinary into extraordinary. So I think this is what our panelists have been talking about. Margaret talked about out-of-the-box things. So that's what stuck to us, that it's not an activity sheet which you fill up every day and every week and you say, okay, done. I'm sometimes in professional development and training, I just am amazed when I look at those timetables and it's written man hours of training completed. You know, man hours of training completed, what is it? Are we animals or horses or whatever? And this whole vocabulary, I tell you, is from the industrial age. Recruitment, you talk about recruitment, you know, hiring, you talk about firing. No. It's just not on. This is not that world any longer. I mean, and I have serious, I completely agree, and I would support the panel on this, that even now, from the industrial age, the computer in the balance sheet is reported as an asset. In the balance sheet, profit and loss statement, computer is reported as an asset. Human beings are reported as an expense. Am I correct? So, because, you know, I face that every day. What happens is sometimes I go to these organizations and I'm a coach and a trainer and a consultant. So when I talk to the CEOs, I ask them, I say, okay, you know, this software is out of date and let's buy Oracle or SAP and it'll cost about ₹1 million. So they look at it and they say, okay, fine, and they sign it. So you've upgraded the computer because it was out of date. So when I go to the same CEO and I say, okay, this guy is out of date and you need to upgrade him, and let's send him a course for ₹200,000. And he has a heart attack. And then we stand over here and we talk about human beings being our biggest assets. Look at the corporate hypocrisy, organizational hypocrisy. Because the tools that we use are still industrial age. Right? So what they're trying to say is that job descriptions are not the only tool to have. The transformation leader looks at the purpose. And that's where I think Lee and Amna very clearly defined the focus on the output, you know, the grades, output, and not on the outcome. On the output, that's the transformational leadership we all need to have. The outcome. What should the kid look like? How does he behave? What are his dreams? What are his talents? And if he's having these grades, is that supporting that or not? That's the question we need to ask in this age. Okay, so let's move up. And I have a few more interesting questions to our very talented panel. How can educational leaders model the behaviors of a leader of learning? If we say that we have to be the role models for people in our school, whether they are children or parents or whoever, then how can educational leaders model the behaviors of a leader of learning, not teaching? And I'll start with Lee again.
There's a joke, you've probably heard it actually, about if you walk into a school and you see an open drain cover and you see 3 people looking down it. One will be the facilities guy, but the other 2 will be the head and the deputy. And you wonder why they're looking at it. I mean, the drain is blocked. We all know it's blocked. The facility guy just needs to know, is the school going to be closed or not? That's all. But you've got the head, you've got the deputy there. So the thing is that the distractions come in again, the day-to-day and so on. So modeling is going to be important in terms of what I was saying earlier, in terms of the conversations around learning. If the majority of the conversations that are happening in a school are not about learning, but about something else, the distractions and so on, then leadership is not modeling what's required. We need to look at what's happening in the classroom, and we need to have conversations about what's happening in the classroom, all about learning. So if the head, when the head is talking to a teacher, if the question that's going to that teacher is about something else other than how well are your teachers learning, how well are your students learning, then of course that's not modeling what we're looking for. The questions have to be constantly asked about learning. How much progress is student A doing? How can they show that they are learning? Show me evidence of their learning in your classroom. I'd love to see it. Can we celebrate the learning through student-led conferences and so on? That's what I think we're looking for from heads. Okay.
That's absolutely right, especially following lesson observations when leaders often do feedback sessions. I think it's important to draw upon questions where they're asking them to think about what was the learning behavior of the students rather than saying the strategies and the methodologies that the teachers used. It's really important to do that. Additionally, I think as a leader, you need to be able to model learning for yourself as well. You need to be able to learn and unlearn from your staff and from your students. In this day and age, I mean, this is a very common phrase everybody uses, change is the only constant. But it's really important. Sometimes we don't realize it. We ourselves do not change, do not demonstrate the level of flexibility that we need to be able to role model to our staff. And it's also about encouraging the staff to learn as much as they can. So this professional development, it's about focusing on, so what have we learned about our experiences? What can we do? So it's tagging on to what you were saying about teaching them how to fail. So it works for the staff as well, as a whole school community. So it needs to go beyond that, building capacity, not just encouraging our students, but building capacity with our community, helping our parents understand, helping them learn what education is about, how the new age is changing. It is all part of educational leadership. Educational leadership is no longer in that heroic concept where you have an individual with a vision and the drive, because that can only take you to a certain level, help you achieve only to a certain limit. A school or any other organization is like a cogwheel machine. Everybody, every piece of it has to move to make it function efficiently and successfully.
Well, I would like all of you to maybe think of the last time you were in a meeting or a conversation where someone was talking to you and you absolutely wanted to disconnect from the conversation because you felt that the other person did not know what they were talking about. I'm sure all of us have some reference to that. And we have these loyalties inside us. We have a loyalty to our experience, or to our education, to the schools we've attended, to the degrees we have, or to our age, to our seniority, or to our, being junior. It could be that I'm the young, innovative person. This person is too old school, they don't know. So the young dismiss the old as much as the old dismiss the young. We have these loyalties, and they're very important. They are our survival mechanisms in this world. But they are frequently the biggest barrier in our learning. And to me, to model learning behavior is really to develop a stomach for discomfort. When you really want to shut down your listening ears, is perhaps the moment when you need to listen. When you're in a meeting, and we've all been in those, when everyone is getting along fine, but there's this one annoying person who has to disagree. This one annoying person that will just be bringing down the process, will be delaying, they probably came late, they probably talk more longer than they need to. But sometimes those very people are the ones with the important red flags. But we dismiss them because of logistical reasons, because of our loyalties, because we don't like talking to annoying people, which is a loyalty. So I guess the best way to model learning behavior is to really develop the capacity for discomfort. And whether that is with a child asking you a question and you feeling like this is the 5th question this child has asked me in this 1 hour, or if it's with a junior staff member that you are training, or if it's with a senior who's micromanaging all the time, and you want to shut them out, but perhaps that is the exact moment when you need to be uncomfortable but listen not to who is saying it, but what they are saying.
I think every leader has to have a learner's heart, that it has to come from inside us. As leaders or administrators, we can't show our learning, or we can't be learners from the office, sitting in the office, or, as your colloquialism says here, on the seat. We really don't display learning when that's the idea, that we want to promote everybody else's learning. We will facilitate everybody else's learning, but, I'm just the administrator. So to me, the way that leaders in the schools really model learning is, the idea of the learning community, that really being part of the staff, being part with the parents and being part with the students in groups that really are learning groups, that we come together, we search out information, we then teach each other the skills of being able to filter that information, because there is so much information out there, and I know our students and many staff and even we as administrators, we've really got to have the skills to be able to work out what's quality and what's not, what's relevant, what's not, what's positive, what's not. That those analytical skills. So to me, the leader modelling learning is a leader who is actually within a learning community as a participant, not just as the one that pays the bills and encourages others, but really gets in and is part and contributing to the learning, the mistakes, the insights, probably the areas that we interpret things incorrectly, but really modelling and doing learning.
So I'd just like to throw back a question from a comment that you've just come, and it's very thought-provoking, because technical competence and subject knowledge is given. So personality development is a big focus of schools and places of learning these days, but character development, that is the area where there is a question mark. And that's what I'd like to ask the panel, that where and how do you think the balance between the personality development and the character development can come in this knowledge era? Yeah.
So character development is a really interesting one, and I think that relates a lot to what we design in terms of the total curriculum of a school. We have to provide opportunities for character to develop, and we can't just assume that it's going to be covered in the maths classroom or a humanities classroom, for example. So if we have a crowded curriculum, in other words, we're putting a lot into it, we're demanding that our students take 5 A-levels and not 3, for example, or if we're asking the students to actually do a lot more after school, they've got to go to Club A and then Club B, then we're not really providing much opportunity for character to develop. And I do think that school leadership has a key sort of responsibility in this area to say, okay, we know that the academic must be taken care of, but if we want to provide opportunities for character development, we've got to look at things like outreach and service in the community and other sort of examples like that, and ensure that they are built into the school curriculum.
And I think what you're referring to here is what we commonly refer to the breadth and balance of the curriculum. When we talk about, is our curriculum broad, is our curriculum balanced, so that our students have the opportunities to engage in activities which are outside of the academic curriculum. I'm just going to share a model that currently the Abu Dhabi government is employing. What they have recently piloted is a student competency framework, which covers certain soft skills, for example, confidence, curiosity building, engagement. And then there are other skills, for example, which include digital competency, innovation, entrepreneurship, skills like that. And also there is a heavy focus on values, honesty, integrity, respect. The interesting thing about this is because the education system identified that the schools were so heavily focused on ensuring that the students performed academically well and were able to access the universities and the next stages in their education, that this major area was overlooked. So what this framework, what they have done, it's a very interesting model, and I'd be happy to share more with colleagues so that it can be disseminated, the idea and the vision behind it. It sort of encourages, whether it's a math, music, English, science lesson, to use those competencies and skills to deliver the lesson. So you're not teaching these competencies and skills in isolation, but you are making use of them when you are doing your algebra lesson. So for example, how to encourage cooperative learning. So in a lesson. So the teachers are consciously planning for those in their lesson plans. And then obviously planning and then delivery, it takes time. Not everything that is planned is delivered, but it's a work in progress. And so far, we have had a successful pilot year in 20 schools, and we have now rolled it out to the remaining 185 private schools. And it's welcomed by students and by parents and by the school itself, because it provides a very good scaffold and a focus.
I would like to throw it to one of my co-panelists because we have representation from the Cambridge examination board over here. I think it's all about assessment. The day you put honesty as one of the markers for an A, people will come up a way to ace honesty, whether that means anything or not. We blame the teacher to no end, that the teacher is not building personality, there's no character building in schools, but just look at what we are testing these kids on. It's all about a perfect score on the SAT, it's all about how many A's you got, that's why we have grade inflation. I mean, it really boils down to assessment, and I'm not at all pushing you to solve the world's problems, but I'm saying that perhaps as an insider and someone who has spoken about the importance of going beyond assessment and really reimagining assessment and broadening it. Perhaps you could comment on what the scope for that is.
I think that's a really important point in terms of, do we value what we assess or assess what we value? And I would say that Cambridge has a role to play, but I don't think it can solve everything. Having said that, there are some interesting developments in terms of curriculum, because obviously curriculum drives assessment, doesn't it? So what is it we're sort of doing in terms of curriculum development such that we can ultimately assess what's happening? And I think, I don't want to do any plugs or anything here, but we have a Global Perspectives program now, which is incredibly important in terms of developing some of these other areas that we're very keen on. Things like collaboration, things like research and investigation. These are important skills that we both ask for in terms of teaching this curriculum, but then also assess. So I think there are ways in which we are moving in this area. Critical thinking is another sort of program that we have. So it can go beyond mathematics and science and languages to interesting areas which we are clearly talking about today in terms of what we value. And so we have a responsibility to a certain extent, but I also, implore school leadership as well to take that responsibility as well. It is collaboration, isn't it, after all? And I do encourage us to work together on these things, such that we are giving students the opportunity to develop the character that we're looking for and so on.
Imagine if we took away the grading system. I think the sky would fall in. Because we are so used to it. We go to the market and we grade the type of potatoes we buy, the type of cloth we're wearing. We grade everything. I'm not quite sure, psychologists, is it something that is nurture or nature? But, you know, imagine education if we really did change that. The way that we give students, whether it's at school or university, an exit where they feel like they are something of a whole person. And I think I'll just pick up on this point. I've heard from a lot of employers recently that they're not looking at the marks or the sheets, whether it's from university or high school. They're looking at the soft skills, how a person presents, what type of values, attitudes they have, how they treat other people. So that's really what they're looking at, because they say it's these things that build an organisation. It's these things that build up people. So I think that is really important. On the other hand, if we look at the essence of what project-based learning is, project-based learning is really about developing citizenship, because there always has to be application, there always has to be activity of doing something, and there's also the system that grades it in terms of how did the person do that? How did they treat other people? How did they reach out to others? How did they accept rejection of an idea? So I think if we look at I know that project-based is really taking off, but I think we can't use it glibly. We've got to use it in its essence to allow it to do the work that we need it to do. And I think that is one of the areas that we can really help to look at these areas of attitudes and values, and somehow give the students a good clue as to how they are developing as good human beings and good citizens.
So I think great learning for all of us, because now we are saying that it's the learning process that we are sharing with each other. Some questions, of course, we thought we would pose to initiate a thought-provoking process for the audience. But actually what we have learned from here is that we need to do a paradigm shift. We need to, first of all, change how we perceive education. And it's just like any other leadership aspect. That paradigm shift means mindset change, then the skill set change, then the tool set change. But if the mindset doesn't change, no matter what tools and what skills that you learn, the results won't come. So I would like to now open up the house, welcome questions from the audience to our panelists, and would request that anybody who has some questions pertinent to the topic may please forward these questions.
The lights on so we can see the audience, please.
Okay, the first question is, in spite of the research findings on how flawed our standardized assessment system is, A-levels, O-levels, why has nothing been done to rescue the issue? I think Lee has to answer that.
I think we need to go back to the purpose of assessment, and it really sort of speaks to some of the things we've been talking about earlier in terms of assessment of learning to a certain extent. I think there's always going to be a need to prove oneself such that one goes on to the next stage of one's career, one's sort of learning and so on. The flawed nature of assessment, I think, is important. I think it's if we just focus on only summative assessment, then we have a flawed approach to learning and a flawed approach to education. If, however, we also combine summative assessment with formative assessment, and by that I mean assessment which indicates where a student is in their learning and helps them and the teacher plan the next steps of their learning. If the focus primarily is on that, then I don't think we have a flawed approach to assessment.
I think the next question is very much related to what you were just saying. There's a question, we talked about soft skills and adding these to the curriculum, but life skills have been incorporated, both in curriculum, teaching and lesson planning. I think it's more of implementation issues in Pakistan. So what does the panel think about it? Who will reply? Mariam, aap.
I think that you need, like I said, life skills. How about we put in trust or honesty or friendship, and we put in there's a grade and there'll be a tuition center that'll open up that'll teach you how to do trust the best than anybody else. But the Harvards and Stanfords of the world reject perfect SAT scores all the time. The only thing common between the people who come to these top schools is this kind of stuff, resilience, honesty. And how do students demonstrate that? They demonstrate that by experiences. So if you're talking about reimagining higher education going forward into the next century, we really have to integrate in our curricula the experience for children to spend, or students or young adults to be out in the field. The LUMS School of Education, if it is going to be set up at some point, we are really building this into the model because the current higher education system, even schools, we expect our kids to know life skills because there's a chapter on life skills or because there's a story that's talking about it, but they need to model that behavior and then they need to be reinforced by their teacher and their colleagues, and they need to not do it sometimes and be told not to. So that experiential learning is crucial, and that's very much absent from much of our curriculum. We don't take our kids out to spend time in the field. In fact, we put greater guards and doors and higher walls in our schools. The lessons that people learn about life are not in some textbook. They're really out in experience.
Okay, do we have more questions?
Could I just add something to the last question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've been talking a lot about modelling. And, you know, students learn more from who we are than what we say in a classroom or what we do in a classroom. So, you know, if we're talking about their soft skills or their values or whatever it is, how are we modelling it? You know, it's really the implicit curriculum that does most of the teaching in the school.
Okay, there's a comment by Yunus Chaudhry. He says BSS is already developing a similar competency framework. I'm developing it at Newlands. So there is somebody already on that framework. The question that they are asking now, and I think that's the question which is a real tough challenge in this era of competition and minimum resources and maximum output, is that I think character building is a main issue in today's educational institutions. How we should give time to this when schools have so much activities planned throughout the academic year. There's no time for character.
Can I just try to answer that? I think it depends on how we are planning and what the focus of those activities are. Why do we have to plan activities which are not focusing on character building and developing those soft values?
Okay, so the next question is, how can we prepare the students for the practical world as compared to the traditional learning curriculum? You know, the question is, and that's a question I tell you, right, because I used to teach at the university level, even in LUMS and everywhere. When they go out, the practical world is totally different. So being able to nourish that at an early age and carry it through so that when they go into the practical world, they are prepared for it.
Why do schools have to do that? What's the role of the home? You know, we get everything lopped on us. We've got to do drug education, citizenship education, honesty, character building. My heavens. Have the students live with us. I really think that really is home education. And maybe we need to help parents do that. but that's not the role of the school.
Okay, one last question, which is interesting. I'd just like to throw it to our panel and somebody can answer it. Who trains, supports, gives feedback to school leaders? So, who's doing their assessment? Who's giving them A, B, C, D?
And the labor bosses.
So, training is just beginning to evolve. So, they're asking that, I mean, the big question is that those who are leading, how are they going to become learners?
I'm just going to try to answer that. A lot of research has gone which shows that self-improving schools, or where a lot of school improvement happens, is where there is networking. So while there may not be a hierarchical system where your leaders are being evaluated, but it's good to have critical friends, have networking connections with other schools where you're able to share challenges and experiences and talk about what works for them and what doesn't work for them. I think that is the best way to be able to learn and improve yourself. I think the focus should be on self-improvement, self-reflection.
Right. Anybody else would like to add? Margaret?
And I think when we talk about appraisal systems, appraisals really don't come from outside. That if appraisals is that critical reflection, if ever you've done action research, you can never undo it. You're always doing that. And also with, professional buddy systems. That I think that it's that personal support. Because sometimes leaders are in a very lonely position. You might have lots of colleagues around you, but often, a lot of responsibility comes back on us as leaders. And we say, well, who do we turn to next? So I think, yes, there's that thing of our own continuous reflection on what we're doing. And if we are part of a learning community in the school, but I think it's that, you will probably do your most learning here over the cups of tea and the cups of coffee and the relaxing, because that's when sort of our true selves come out and what's really worrying us. And I think we really do learn and support each other.
Great. I think there's been a lot of rich ideas being presented over here, and the challenge that we have is that we have a very busy life. And in that busy life, we have to squeeze in everything. But that is what transformation is all about. And as a leader, I tell you, wherever you are, especially in your classes, I always say it's the 3 I's which count. 1, develop interest. The second I is involvement. Empower them, engage them. And the third is inspire them by your own behavior. You get these 3 I's right, you'll get the grades and you'll get the character also. So that's basically, thank you very much for the panel, their discussion, their input, their sharing of ideas. I think it's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much for the audience, for their ideas.